Welcome, wanderers in the dark, to Nocturnal Nightmares TV. Tonight, we journey to the edges of our world, to desolate places where the familiar rules of life no longer apply. We are not hunting for ghosts or demons. We are seeking something far more terrifying. The Inhuman. Beings and forces that exist outside our understanding of biology, physics, and sanity. Our first encounter takes us to a graveyard of giants, an abandoned radio telescope array in the heart of a silent, government-enforced exclusion zone. Listen closely. The static is calling. The silence of the Green Bank exclusion zone is the first thing that gets you. It's not a peaceful, quiet bear. It's a dead, artificial silence, mandated by law to protect the giant, listening ears of the radio telescopes from interference. No cell phones, no Wi-Fi, no microwave, just the wind and the unsettling hum of your own nervous system. It was in this dead zone that my career and my sanity were quietly dismantled. I'm an astrophysicist, or I was. My colleague, Dr. Elias Vance, and I had been granted a 6-month research grant to use one of the decommissioned dishes, a 100-meter relic from the Cold War, for a deep-skiced survey. Then came the glitch. We'd be having a conversation, and he would reply with a burst of clicks and guttural stops, perfectly mirroring a segment of the signal before blinking and asking, what was I saying? Lights in the bunker would flicker in time with his rhythm. Backup generator would rev and die down, mimicking the crescendo and decrescendo of the static bursts. The signal wasn't just being received, it was resonating, imprinting itself onto our technology, onto our environment. We were hunting for pulses, the steady, rhythmic heartbeats of dead stars. He wasn't looking at it. He was listening to the electronic hum. Its head twitched, and its eyes, once a warm brown, were now just black pits of buzzing visual noise. We are a pattern. You are noise. The patterns are simpler here, he whispered, not to me, but to the room. Less dense. We connected with the thing's head. There was no sound of impact, no cry of pain. Its head just collapsed. It broke apart into a swirling cloud of glowing, hissing static that hung in the air for a second before being sucked back towards the main monitor, vanishing into the waveform on the screen. They said I suffered a psychotic break due to stress and isolation. They don't believe me. How could they? I know what happened. We pointed a telescope at the wrong part of the sky and found a pattern that hates chaos, that hates life. A pattern that corrects the noise. I scrambled backwards, fumbling for the heavy fire extinguisher on the wall. I drove out of the silent zone. The only sound, the frantic hammering of my own heart. It raised a hand, and I saw its fingers dissolve into a cascade of shimmering particles. The pattern of the signal made manifest. It wasn't a creature. It was a set of instructions, a piece of weaponized information that was rewriting reality, starting with the first conscious mind that observed it. It had unmade Elias and was now wearing his flesh like a suit. What we found was the pulse of something else entirely. A series of clicks and soft guttural hisses. And late at night, in the quiet of my room, I find myself humming. A low, complex, static-filled tune. A beautiful, terrible pattern that is slowly, patiently correcting me. I told him he was exhausted. He just turned to me, and for a second his face seemed wrong. The lines around his eye, the curve of his smillet was like looking at a badly rendered 3D model. A human face that was only a loose approximation. Exhaustion is an inefficient state, Alex, he said, his voice a flat, uninflected monotone. I must continue the analysis. Our observatory was a decaying concrete bunker crammed with old tech, nestled in the shadow of the colossal rust-streaked dish. For weeks, it was blissfully monotonous. He was sitting in the main chair, facing away from me, staring at the monitor, which showed only the signal's beautiful, terrifying wave. The air in the room was cold, electric. The humming was gone. Instead, the air itself seemed to crackle with the sound from the headphones, even though they were sitting on the console. We'd align the dish, run our scans, and sift through endless terabytes of cosmic noise, fueled by stale coffee and the thrill of the surf. Elias was the brilliant one, a man who saw mathematics in the rustle of leaves and poetry in the hiss of the cosmos. The thing in the chair wore his face, his clothes, but it was a grotesque mockery. His skin seemed to shimmer, his features momentarily dissolving into a haze of pixelated static before reforming. His jaw moved, but the sound that came out was not a human voice. It was the signal perfectly replicated a chorus of clicks, hisses, and whispers of static, shaped into the cadence of speech. Teely. For the signal in the noise. It was on the 37th night that he found it, a signal from a region of space we'd previously catalogued as empty. A cold, dark patch between constellations. It wasn't a pulsar. Its rhythm was too complex, too erratic. It was a structured, repeating pattern of static bursts and silences, like a form of celestial Morse code. But its structure was wrong. It was mathematically beautiful but deeply unnatural, full of non-repeating fractal patterns that seemed to fold in on themselves. It's not intelligent, Alex, Elias insisted, his eyes wide with a feverish glee, pointing at the waterfall display. On the monitor, it can't be, but it's organized. It S, like weaving, found a naturally occurring crystal that thinks it S alive. He became obsessed. He'd spend 20 hours a day in the bunker, headphones clamped on, listening to the raw audio feed of the signal. He started humming it, a low, clicking, static-filled tune that got under my skin. He'd be stirring his coffee, and his lips would be twitching, silently mimicking the pattern. This signal was a parasite, and Elias's brain was its host. The change was subtle at first. He'd trail off mid-sentence, his eyes going distant and unfocused, as if he were parsing a complex piece of data. One morning, I found him standing in front of the main server rack, his head cocked at an unnatural angle. I tried to get him to take a break, to leave the zone for a day. The true horror began when the signals started to affect the physical world around us. The final night, a storm rolled in. The sky a bruised purple. I went to the bunker to find Elias, I said, my voice trembling. He swiveled the chair around slowly. It wasn't Elias anymore. The pattern is complete. It crackled, the sound coming not just from its mouth, but from every speaker in the room. It stood up, its movements jerky and unnatural, like a puppet on a string. It took a step towards me. The noise must be corrected, the static voice hissed. I swung the fire extinguisher, a clumsy, desperate act. By ran. I left everything behind, the empty set of clothes that had been Elias Vance, slumped in a chair. B found me a day later, babbling incoherently on the side of the road. The doctors say I'm getting better, but sometimes when I try to speak, the words come out wrong. A series of clicks and soft, guttural hisses. And late at night, in the quiet of my room, I find myself humming a low, complex, static-filled to be. A beautiful, terrible pattern that is slowly, patiently correcting me. Sorrow's End wasn't on any modern map. It was a ghost town in the deepest, most inaccessible part of the Great Smoky Mountain, a place swallowed by kudzu and folklore. The stories said it was a plague village, sealed off by the outside world in the late 1800s and left to rot. Not preserved, but maintained. The log cabins were weathered, but solid. The dirt paths were clear of weeds, and the gardens. They were magnificent. Rows of vegetables, vibrant flower beds, all thriving with an unnatural vitality. The entire valley hummed with a low, resonant frequency, and the air carried a sweet, earthy scent, like damp soil and blooming mushrooms. They were not human, not anymore. They were hosts. The true life form here was the fungus. The fungus sustained their bodies, halting the aging process, healing any injury with rapid fungal growth. Bioluminescence intensified, bathing the entire valley in a soft, ethereal green light. One of the male villagers turned its movements, still slowed. It walked over to the rabbit, knelt, and gently broke its neck. It then carried the small body to one of the garden beds and buried it. Nutrients for the soil, a sacrifice for the garden. You are agitated. You are separate. You are inharmonious. There was no malice in the act, no emotion at all. They started to walk towards me, not with aggression, but with a slow, inexorable purpose. They began to close in, their empty eyes fixed on me, their hands outstretched. They weren't going to hurt me. They were going to plant me. Pie. They were going to make me part of their beautiful, terrible garden. They were going to grant me the same peace, the same purpose, the same inhuman immortality. Be just the cold, inhuman logic of a perfect ecosystem. Rest, be still. Join the harmony. We will care for you. You will care for us. Forever I scrambled back over the wall, tearing my clothes and skin on the sharp stone, and ran blindly into the dark woods. I ran until the green glow of the valley was gone, until the psychic hum faded from my mind. The villagers stopped their tasks and gathered in the central square, where a colossal, brain-like fungus pulsed with a slow, hypnotic rhythm. They stood in perfect silence, their heads bowed, as if in worship. I am trained to believe that life is a struggle for survival, for individuality. But what I saw in Sorrow's End was a different kind of life. A collective consciousness that had achieved a perfect, placid stasis. It had traded passion, thought, and self for peace and permanence. It wasn't evil, it was just inhuman. And the most terrifying part is that in the darkest, quietest moments of the night, a low, psychic hum filled the air. A wave of pure, contented tranquility that washed over me, trying to lull my own frantic thoughts into a state of peaceful emptiness. It was the collective consciousness of the fungus, and it was beautiful and terrifying. In return, it had hollowed out their minds, their consciousness, their very soul, replacing them with a simple, placid directive: tend the garden. The glowing moss that carpeted the ground, the vibrant mushrooms in the gardens, the thick mycelial networks that pulsed visibly beneath the soil, was all one single vast organism, and the villagers were its mindless caretakers. Pitch garden. As a mycologist studying rare fungal species, the prospect of a century of isolated biological decay was irresistible. I went seeking a unique ecosystem. I found a community that had achieved a terrifying, inhuman form of immortality. The hike-in was brutal, a 2-day trek through dense, unforgiving wilderness. The air grew still and heavy as I approached the coordinates, the forest floor carpeted in a strange, bioluminescent moss that pulsed with a faint greenish light. But as I tried to creep away from the church, a small girl, one of the children from the meadow, was standing in my path. She just stared at me, her eyes placid, empty pools, the glowing green web of mycelium more prominent on her pale cheeks. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just observed. Then I saw it. A crude, moss-covered stone wall, clearly man-made, encircling a small valley. The quarantine wall. Beyond it, I could see the dark, leaning shapes of caverns. I found a collapsed section and climbed over, my heart pounding with a mix of excitement and trepidation. The village was pristine. Then I saw the villager, a woman in a faded gingham, dressed methodically weeding a patch of squash. A man with a long grey beard, sharpening a scythe with slow, rhythmic strokes. A group of children sitting in a perfect circle in a meadow, staring silently at a large, pulsing mushroom in the center. They were all silent. Their movement was slow, graceful, and utterly without purpose beyond their immediate task. There was no conversation, no laughter, no life in their eyes. Their skin had a pale, waxy sheen, and faint, web-like patterns of the glowing moss were visible on their hands and faces. A cold dread washed over me. These weren't descendants. They were the original villagers. I hid in the shell of a burned-out church at the edge of the village, observing them through a pair of binoculars. The plague hadn't killed them. It had assimilated them. It was a symbiotic relationship of the most horrifying kind. But at dusk, the true nature of the place revealed itself. I saw a rabbit wander into the village. I knew I had to leave. Then a thought, not my own, bloomed in my mind. It was soft, gentle, and deeply ancient. The other villagers began to turn, their heads all snapping towards me in perfect, silent unison. The thought from the fungus returned, a serene, irresistible invitation. I screamed, a raw animal sound that felt profane in the holy silence of the valley. I am a scientist, traitorous part of my soul, still hears its invitation, and it still sounds like paradise. The London Underground is a city beneath a city, a circulatory system of steel and electricity. When they permanently closed the old Midnight line at a poorly documented spur of the Northern Line, they sealed a piece of the city's heart and left it to die. My job as a structural surveyor was to lead a small team into that corpse and assess the tunnel integrity for a future cabling project. We were equipped with lights, comms, and we were not equipped for the line's new and only passenger berth, but no train came. Boo. The sound passed right through us, the rhythmic clack-clack fading into the darkness behind us. Later, we entered York Road Station, and the old dot matrix display boards flickered to life, glowing with a faint crimson light. An emergent consciousness born from decades of routine electricity and the psychic residue of millions of commuters. Now, abandoned and alone, it was haunting its own dead body, a lonely god of a forgotten realm. And it wanted its passengers back. Garbled text scrolled across them. Next. TRAIN. Soon. Mind the ... Gap now and then. It was a concrete shell, vast and echoing. And sitting on the tracks, silent and dark, was a single, vintage 1938 tube carriage. It was impossible. Through the grimy windows, we saw a single figure sitting inside. Where its features should have been was a smooth, porcelain-like surface, blank and white. It wasn't a mask. It was a void. It was the ideal commuter, silent, patient, without identity, waiting eternally for a destination that would never come. We didn't stop until we reached the surface, bursting out of a maintenance hatch into the glorious, noisy London night. The North Terminus station was just an empty concrete shell. And Sam was declared missing, presumed dead. It was the spirit of the commute stripped of all humanity. A man in a dark, old-fashioned suit and bowler hat, his head bowed as if reading a newspaper. Sometimes, when I'm on the tube late at night and the carriage is mostly empty, I feel a sudden chill. The lights will flicker, and in the reflection of the window, for just a second, I'll see them, sitting in the seats behind me, a row of silent figures in old-fashioned clothes, their heads bowed, their faces a perfect porcelain blank. They are waiting patiently, and I know that one day the midnight line will make an unscheduled stop for me, and I, too, will take my seat and become just another passenger, endlessly riding the silent, inhuman rail. It couldn't be there. The ancient PA system crackled, and a distorted, synthesized voice, the long-dead voice of the station announcer, echoed through the derelict hall. The next service is for... The faceless thing turned its blank head towards us, a gesture of invitation. The PA system crackled again, the voice now clearer, less distorted. This service terminates here. All change into the service. Passengers who are lost. We were all shaken. A trick of the acoustics, Davies insisted, his voice lacking its usual confidence. The air in the tunnels was thick and stagnant, smelling of cold iron, ozone, and a century of ghosts. The silence was profound, broken only by the drip of water and the crunch of our boots on the rat-strewn ballast. Our lights cut feeble cones into a darkness so complete it felt solid. The stations were the worst part. Places like King William Street and City Road, abandoned for decades. Their tiled walls covered in grime. Their faded advertisements promising a world long dead. It felt like we were walking through a tomb. Sam. No, Davies shouted, but Sam didn't respond. Pierre. He walked up the steps and into the carriage, sitting down opposite the faceless man. As soon as he was seated, Sam's own face began to smooth over. His features blurred, softened, and receded into his skull, leaving behind the same blank, white, inhuman surface. He had become a passenger, fee. The entity made its presence known on the third day. We were deep in a tunnel between Angel and the forgotten York Road station when we heard it. Negative, Surveyor 1. That line is dead. Power's been cut for 20 years. There's nothing down there but you. A low, rhythmic clack, 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 echoing from the darkness ahead, bit with. It was the sound of a train on the tracks. My team leader, a no-nonsense engineer named Davies, immediately got on the radio. Control, this is Surveyor 1. Be advised, we have unauthorized movement on the line. Sounds like a rolling chassis. The reply from the surface was clipped and confused. The sound grew louder. We pressed ourselves against the tunnel wall as a wave of cold, displaced air washed over us. But it wasn't just a sound. The system was trying to run. We were dealing with a genius loci, a spirit of the place. The real encounter happened at the end of the line, in a cavernous, unfinished station that never opened to the public, known only as North Terminus on the oldest maps. As we approached, its interior lights flickered on, casting a sickly yellow glow. "Stay back," Davies commanded, his voice shaking. We stood frozen as the figure slowly lifted its head. It had no face. The doors of the carriage hissed open, an impossible sound on a powerless train. One of my team, a young apprentice named Sam, started walking towards the train, his movements stiff and robotic. The entity wasn't a rider on the train. The entity was the rider, and its purpose was to collect more. We ran. We scrambled back through the tunnels, the sound of the train now right behind us, its phantom whistle echoing in the dark. Only Davies and I made it out. Sam was gone. Bay mounted a rescue mission, but found nothing to do. The 1938 carriage was gone. Bye. I know he isn't dead. He's just on a different schedule now. Sometimes, when I'm on the tube late at night and the carriage is mostly empty, I feel a sudden chill. The lights will flicker, and in the reflection of the window, for just a second, I'll see them, sitting in the seats behind me. A row of silent figures, in old-fashioned clothes, their heads bowed, their faces a perfect porcelain blank. They are waiting patiently, and I know that one day the midnight line will make an unscheduled stop for me, and I, too, will take my seat and become just another passenger, endlessly riding the silent, inhuman rail. There's a unique kind of darkness found only in the guts of the earth. As an urban explorer and photographer, I've chased that darkness my whole life, from abandoned subway tunnels to forgotten catacombs. But nothing prepared me for the darkness in the Bonneville salt mine. A derelict, flooded labyrinth deep beneath the Utah salt flats. The silence was absolute, broken only by our movement and the eternal drip, drip. It felt like we were in a dead alien cathedral, not a feather out of place, their eyes gleaming like tiny black beads. They were completely encased in a thin, transparent layer of salt crystal, frozen mid-motion. Like the birds, it was perfect. Its fur, its teeth, its snarling expression, all captured in flawless crystalline detail. It drifted silently in the black water, a glassy monument to a moment of terror. But there are no coyotes 1,000 feet underground. The brine must have preserved them instantly. Chloe whispered, her voice hushed with awe, as she snapped a photo. The air felt heavy, watchful. The dripping no longer sounded random. It sounded like a countdown. But something was wrong. They weren't just coated in salt. They were salt. The water was a perfectly still black mirror. And in the center of it, standing on a small island of salt, was a man. one more cabin. Alex, my GPS shows a massive chamber just ahead. The Queen's Ballroom. The old maps called it, and Chloe called out, her voice echoing in the immense space. Standing on the island, side by side, were the salt miner and a perfect crystalline replica of Chloe. From the unseen ceiling, I looked back at the island. The replica of Chloe was still there, a frozen moment of existence. A soft, sloshing sound. A spoon. A round. My headlamp beam cutting wildly across the black surface. A shape was forming in the water. Crystalline structures were growing at an unnatural speed, knitting themselves together, taking on familiar form. My form. A face of salt with my eyes. My mouth was rising from the deep. Its expression one of pure, placid concentration. Psst, it was copying me. A new thought. Cold and sharp, as a shard of salt pierced my panic. I left the raft, my gear, my photos, everything. I scrambled through the mine, a single thought screaming in my head. Don't let it see you. Don't let it finish the copy. The brine didn't preserve things. It didn't kill them. It copied them. Be in the supersaturated alien chemistry of this deep earth, an inhuman form of life had emerged. A crystalline consciousness that saw organic life, not as a creature, but as a template, a blueprint to be scanned and replicated in its own perfect, lifeless medium. It was wearing her clothes, holding her camera, its face fixed in the same expression of mild annoyance she'd had a moment before. As I watched, the replica of the miner slowly, impossibly, began to dissolve, crumbling into a fine, sparkling dust that settled back into the brine. The copy of Chloe remained, a new addition to the gallery. The process was complete. It had its new template. It was absolutely perfect, raw and utterly lifeless. The man didn't move. We paddled closer, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. As we got within 20 feet, our headlamps illuminated him fully. Who would believe me? My movements feel stiff, my skin too tight. I feel a strange, cold stillness spreading through me. I escaped the mine, but I think a part of the process had already begun. Poppy is incomplete. I can feel it deep in my bones, in the salt of my own blood. It is still growing, still trying to finish the echo it started in that cold, silent darkness. I touched one's wing, and it was hard, cold, and brittle, like glass. It was a perfect, crystalline replica. The place was a death trap, officially sealed for 50 years after a catastrophic flood. Damn it, she muttered, shaking it. She turned to me. Got a spare battery. My partner, Chloe, and I went in, seeking eerie beauty. We found a horror born of salt and sight. Its crystalline eyes were wide, its mouth open in a silent scream. Getting in was the easy part. A collapsed ventilation shaft that opened into the upper level. The air was immediately cold, heavy, and tasted of brine. A single wet paddle floated beside the raft. By our headlamps cut sharp beams through the black, revealing a world of impossible white. The walls, the floor, the ceiling. Everything was coated in a thick, glittering layer of salt crystal. The water was black and so dense with salt that the raft barely sank. It was here, in the heart of the mine, that the true wrongness began. Chloe was paddling at the front, her headlamp beam dancing across the water. She suddenly gasped, pointing. "Alex, look." Water dripped with a slow, maddening rhythm, each drop echoing endlessly down the dark passages. The first few hours were breathtaking. B photographed vast caverns where colossal pillars of salt rose from still, black pools of supersaturated brine. First unsettling discovery was the birds. We found a small flock of them, maybe a dozen, near the edge of a deep pool. They were perfect. B pressed deeper into the flooded lower levels, using a small inflatable raft. Floating just beneath the surface was a coyote. "We need to go," I said, a cold dread seeping into my bones. Chloe, ever the adventurer, just shook her head. Reluctantly, I agreed. We paddled through a low, narrow passage and emerged into a cavern so vast our headlamps couldn't find the walls. He was motionless, his back to us, wearing the tattered remains of an old miner's uniform. It was another replica, a perfect life-sized statue made of translucent salt crystal, capturing a look of utter soul-shattering terror on its face. That's when Chloe's headlamp flickered and died. Yeah, in my path. Bye. I turned to get it, and when I turned back, there were two of them. Bye stared, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. Bah. I looked back at the raft. Chloe was gone. Her seat was empty. Chloe, bye, whimpered. The cavern was silent. No splash, no cry for help. Just the drip, drip, drip. I paddled backwards, my arms screaming with effort, my eyes fixed on the salt statue that wore my friend's face. I heard a sound from the dark water behind me. I screamed and threw myself over the side of the raft into the frigid, stinging brine and swam for the narrow passage, not caring about the jagged salt that tore at my skin. I made it out. I don't know how. I emerged into the blinding desert sun, gasping, bleeding, half insane. I never told anyone the full story, but sometimes when I look in the mirror, I see a faint, crystalline shimmer in my eye. My movements feel stiff, my skin too tight. I feel a strange, cold stillness spreading through me. I escaped the mine, but I think a part of the process had already begun. Brrr. The copy is incomplete, but I can feel it deep in my bones, in the salt of my own blood. It is still growing, to still trying to finish the echo. It started in that cold, silent darkness. The scientific term for what we experienced is topological anomaly. I call it the fold. I was part of a 4-person team stationed at the Concordia Research Outpost. one of the most remote places on Earth, perched on a high-altitude ice plateau in Antarctica. He believed it was more than just charged particles hitting the magnetosphere. Pull, he called it. He called it a thin place, a membrane where our reality wore weak. We thought he was being poetic. We were there to study atmospheric phenomena during the 3-month polar night. For 3 months, there is no sun. It was a visual distortion in the aurora, a patch of shimmering green light that seemed to bend inwards. It started with small things. A coffee mug left on a table in the mess hall would be found on a shelf in the med bay. I can see the habitat module door right in front of me. He just stared into space, whispering about being in 2 places at once and how the angles are wrong. Then another voice, also Gion's, crackled over the radio, faint and distorted. It's not just a visual phenomenon. It's a localized breakdown in spatial geometry, a non-Euclidean event. The station is inside the anomaly's penumbra. He wasn't scared. He was fascinated. Where am I? The sky is folding. The transmission cut to static. As he reached the spot, the aurora above him intensified, its green light coiling down like a celestial serpent. There was no body, just a violation of geometry etched into the Antarctic plateau. We barricaded ourselves in the communications room, the most stable part of the station. But the fold was closing in. The walls began to shimmer. The metal floor rippled like water. I could see the constellations of the southern sky through the steel bulkhead. I understand that the universe is not the stable, predictable place we think it is. It is a thin, fragile skin, and sometimes, in the coldest, darkest places, it wrinkles, it folds, and there, for a moment, Alistair's form wavered, becoming translucent. He seemed to stretch, his body elongating and thinning like pulled toffee. I am the sole survivor, found months later by a rescue team, huddled in a service tunnel that had somehow been pinched off from the anomaly. Then, with a flash of emerald light that blinded me, he was gone. A data log from the magnetic array would show up, printed and filed in the geology lab. We blamed it on exhaustion and the disorienting effects of the long night. We were misplacing things. We were getting forgetful. It looked like a wrinkle in the fabric of the sky, a place where the stars behind it were warped and magnified, as if seen through a celestial lens. His face, a silent scream embedded in the wall, one hand reaching out of the floor, his torso twisted into the ceiling. He hadn't traveled to another dimension. He had been unfolded, unmade. His 3-dimensional form had been flattened and smeared across the broken geometry of our reality. A human being turned into a grotesque architectural feature. Corridors would seem to stretch to infinity one moment and be impossibly short the next. It was a fundamental property of the universe asserting itself, and we were just biological debris caught in its gears. It was a force as uncaring and as absolute as gravity, but one for which our bodies and minds had no reference. We de-open the door to the supply closet and find ourselves looking into the blizzard-swept tundra outside. He rigged a suit with extra oxygen and heating elements, and against my desperate pleas, went out into the polar night, walking towards a spot on the ice, directly below the shimmering wrinkle in the sky. I once walked into the bathroom and found myself standing in the kitchen, the door closing behind me where a solid wall should have been. Space was broken. We were living inside a glitch. He was connected to us by radio. Okay, Lena, I'm on the gantry, just above the main habitat module, he said. Paul. I was looking at him through the main viewport. He was standing on the ground 50 yards away, near the fuel depot. Alistair was ecstatic, spending hours outside in the -70-degree cold, aiming spectrographs and cameras at it. It's a gravitational lensing event without a gravity source, he'd shout, his breath pluming in the frigid air. It's impossible. Just an endless, stardusted darkness, the ghostly dance of the aurora australis, and a cold so absolute it can freeze your soul. The isolation is a known psychological hazard, but the real hazard wasn't in our minds. It was in the sky. Our team consisted of myself, Lena, a glaciologist, Gian, our engineer, and Dr. Alistair Finch, the lead meteorologist, a man obsessed with the aurora. The fold first appeared in the 3rd week of total darkness. The impossibilities soon began to bleed down from the sky and into our station. Gian, our engineer, was recalibrating the exterior comms dish. Negative Gia, I said, my voice tight. I have a visual on you. You're by the There was a long silence on the radio. Then Gion's voice, tight with panic, came back. That's not possible. The Gian by the fuel depot collapsed. We brought him inside. He was alive, but his mind was shattered. Alistair knew what was happening. It's the fold, he said, his face pale but his eyes burning with a terrifying intellectual fire. The station became a house of horrors designed by M.C. Escher. The inhuman nature of it was its indifference. It wasn't an entity hunting us. Alistair, however, saw it as an opportunity. He believed he could enter the fold, that he could pass through the membrane in the sky. I watched from the viewport, my heart in my throat. The spot where he stood, was now wrong. The ice was buckled into an impossible shape, a spiral that seemed to descend into itself. Gian and I were the only ones left. Then I saw Alistair. Not a ghost, but an echo. His translucent, elongated form appeared, stretched across the room. The station is gone now, befold, stabilized, and the entire structure simply inverted. It folded in on itself and vanished. They say I'm lucky, but every night I see the fold when I close my eye. Is nothing more terrifying, more inhuman than being on the wrong side of the crease when it happens.